Before Dave comes up to begin our service, I have a couple of announcements that I would like to share with you. The first has to do with a meeting that was scheduled for our Sunday school teachers and helpers. It was a potluck or gathering meal for different things. That has been postponed. That was scheduled for the 13th, so that's not going to be going. So if you're planning on that, you can take that off your calendar. Just let you know about that. Second thing that we want to let you know is that cleaned up a little bit in the church. So out here in this, on the coat rack, there was a lot of things that were hanging there that had been there for quite some time. There was a pair of swimming trunks there for quite a while. I don't have any explanation for that. I don't know where that came from, but there are a few coats and different items, and the swimming trunks are out there on the bench. If they are yours, no judgment, but you may want them and to want to take them home. And so we encourage you to take a look at those things that are out there on the bench. If they are not picked up in a reasonable amount of time, they're going to be donated to someone that might be able to use them. So if you don't claim them, then they're going to be gone. Also, along those same lines, we won't be taking these to the thrift store or but there are some Bibles as well that have accumulated here over the course of time. You may not have remembered where you put that. We placed the Bibles out on the front bench or the table that as you come in the entryway, they're out there. There's some nice ones, hand tool, leather cover, that kind of thing. So if you're missing your Bible, I'm surprised that it took you this long to realize it was gone. A little bit. No, you have Bibles at home that you're reading. You have one for church and one for at home. But whatever, if it is yours, we encourage you to take it. Otherwise, we may find someone that needs it and give it to them. So if you have your Bible with you, great. If you don't, it may be out in the foyer. So go take a look at that. So those are the announcements I've got. Glad to be with you this morning. This is not a formal welcome. We'll leave that to Dave. Dave, would you begin our service today?
Welcome everyone here. Those that are visiting, we hope this is your church home and feel that it is your church home today. And thank you for attending with us. Our reading, scripture reading is Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. And this talks about faith, what God gives us. And it goes like this. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. You know, when we're young, even when we're old like me, you see a future, and it's what God's going to give us. And I think sometimes as we grow old, we get less optimistic what God's going to give us. But when we're young, for those of you that are closer to my age, think about when you're being courted or you're courting, and the vision you had for your future. Getting married, starting a family, raising kids. These are things we had. I want to tell you a little story about a lady that had a vision. When she was being courted, I guess she was, on their first date, he was an hour and a half late. Okay, well, the Yankees are playing. They won extra innings. And there's a little wager he had on it. Legitimate. He got her fired from her job. She was a single mom with kids. And then he got her evicted from her house. ladies, don't beat this person up too bad. Then after they were married, he wasn't home for 13 Fridays in a row. She was counting. But this lady had a vision, and she knew a diamond in the rough, I guess. But she had a vision. And I think this is what God gives us, is a vision, and we have to act on it. We have to trust that God will give us what we need. Not what we want, but what we need. Anyway, that lady was my wife, is my wife. And there were a lot of people that questioned why she ever married me. I thought it was a done deal. But my wife and I talk about it, why she didn't dump me. I don't know. I gave her all kinds of reasons, I guess. But when you have a vision and you're with God and God is with you, life will be in God's hands, and it's up to us to not question, but to believe in God that He will do what we need in our lives. May we bow our heads. My wife's not here, so I can tell that story. So you can't tell her I told the story, okay? Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for everything you do in our lives. You lay out a program for us. You laid out a program before we were even born. You knew what was going to happen, how it was going to happen. And we question your wisdom, and we shouldn't, but it is our nature. May we be more in tune with you and what you do for us. Amen.
Take your red hymnals. We're going to be, the message is about faithfulness today, and we're going to be singing about that. Or you can read on the board here. Could we stand, please?
Amen.
Invite the kids forward. Good morning. Oh, kind of low energy here this morning. Oh. That'll work. I like that. That's good. So, I've got a question about a word that I want to know if you guys know what it is. Faithfulness. It was just in the song that we sang, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Do you guys know what faithfulness means? Thankfulness, and you said again? Yes, being faithful. Yeah. Yeah. It has something to do with trust, definitely. But it's one of those big words that we're like, man, what does this mean? Because it does mean something. And when we talk about faithfulness, we want to talk about what it means so that we do the right thing. Yeah, so, okay, I got a story. This is not my story. This is a story that Jesus told, okay? Jesus told a story. This is in Matthew 25. He told a story about a rich guy, all right? And this rich guy was going to go on a long trip. And he gave his servants, the people that worked for him, he gave them certain things. He called one servant to him, and he said, I'm going to give you these 5 bags of gold. And he gave him the 5 bags of gold. And then he called a second servant and said, I'm going to give you these 3 bags of gold. I'll give you these. And then he takes one, the last servant, he says, I'm going to give you 1 bag of gold. And he gives him the 1. Was it 3 or 2? Yeah, anyway, less than 5, more than 1. So each of them takes the gold, and then the rich master goes off on his journey, and then he comes back, and he asks, what did you guys do with the gold? So what do you think that these servants should have done with their gold? What do you think was the expectation for them, that they do what they needed to do with the gold? Save it. That's a good answer. Make his tower bigger? Maybe. Use it. Thinking about it? Yeah? What do you think? You just wanted to raise your hand? It's okay. So this is what the master wanted his servants to do with this gold. He wanted them to use that money to make more money. So he wanted them to invest it or work with it and have it do more. So the first servant, who had how many bags? 5, comes to his master and says, Master, you gave me 5 bags. Boss, you gave me 5 bags. I used that 5 bags and I made 5 more bags. So now I've got 10. So he gives that back to his boss. And the second one comes and says, hey, you gave me 3 bags and I made 3 more. So here you go. And gives that to his boss. And the last one said, I had 1 and I was afraid of you, so I hid it so that I wouldn't accidentally lose it. And here's your 1 back. Now, which one got in trouble? The one with 1 bag, because the master, the boss, wanted them to do something good with that. They had some expectations. And this is what the master told the first 2 guys who worked for him. He said, you are good and faithful. There's that word again.
So was the master good?
Was the master good? Good question. That's a good one to ask your folks. Investment in money, you guys get to deal with that one. So, yeah. Anyway, the master, the boss, had an expectation for his servants. And the servants that lived up to the expectation, the ones that did what their master wanted them to do, he called faithful. The ones that didn't do it was not faithful. So here's what I want you guys to know about faithfulness, that word that I was telling you about. Faithfulness means that we're going to do what is expected of us. Okay? We are faithful in doing those things. So what do your parents tell you to do sometimes? Don't play with knives.
That's what she does.
She's doing it right now. You're putting it away. Yes. So you just hang on to it, okay? So what do our parents sometimes tell us to do? Pick up our clothes? Brush our teeth? Do we trust our parents when they tell us to do those things?
Yes.
Are we being faithful when we don't do those things? No. So you guys know what faithfulness is, right?
It's rebellion.
Yes, rebelling is the opposite of being faithful. So God wants us to be faithful to the people that he has put in charge of us here on earth, but God also wants us to be faithful to him because God is faithful and keeps all of his promises to us. All right? That's a big concept. We're going to talk about it more with the adults later. I just want you guys to understand this one thing. When God has an expectation for you, if we want to be faithful, then we'll live up to that expectation. We'll do what God calls us to do. Does that make sense? Good. All right. Here's the one thing that I want you to think about as far as doing what God wants us to do. God wants us to love each other. Can you do that and be faithful in that? You're going to work on it, right? Yeah, okay. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you that you give us good directions and that we can trust you, that the directions and the instructions you give us are for our good. Sometimes we don't know why, but we trust you and we want to be faithful in fulfilling those expectations and doing what you want us to do. Give us the strength and the courage to do it, and these kids especially. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thanks, guys.
Boy, wouldn't it nice to be young again? In your order of service, this little sheet, shine, Jesus, shine. read hymn again, 289, Blessed Assurance.
Dave read from Hebrews 11. I'm just going back one chapter for our text today from Hebrews chapter 10. In it, the author writes, beginning in the 19th verse, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." You can't talk about faithfulness without talking about Abraham. They've shared that God has a plan for us, a way that lays before us, and if we want to step into it and move forward in it, God has some wonderful stuff in store, and that couldn't be more true than it is with Abraham. When the authors of the New Testament wanted to lift up an example of faithfulness, they went to Abraham. The authors of the Old Testament did the same. They picked Abraham. And so we're going to head in that same direction. Terah, the father of Abraham, he takes his family, his son Abraham, his wife Sarah, his grandson Lot, Lot's family, and he heads out of his homeland, Ur of the Chaldees, and he moves north into the land of Haran. Now, Haran is where they settle down. And just to get your bearings, if you've seen a map of the Mediterranean and you know where Israel is, that's Canaan, and that's kind of where we're headed here. And to the east of that is where Ur would have been, and then up to the north and slightly west, that's Haran. So that's a kind of a loop there is what we're talking about. But the end of Genesis is where the story picks up at Genesis 11, and it says there that after they settle in Haran, that Terah lives out his days. He lives to a long old age, and he dies there in Haran. Now, you need to understand something about family in those days. Family was a pretty big deal. I know we all, we love our families, and we think that they're important and everything, but it's nothing like it was back then. Family was everything to people in those days. They stayed put in their family unit. They stayed with the family, subsequent generations, in one household. This is why Abraham's story is so compelling. At the beginning of Genesis 12, we get this account. This is after Terah died, and this is where Abraham's part of the story starts. In that 12th chapter, God tells Abraham that he is supposed to leave his family. Take off. Leave them behind. Don't stay where they are. You need to leave your father's house, leave your kindred, and you need to go into this unknown place, into this unknown future, into the place that God was going to give you, and there God would make you the patriarch of a great nation. That's the promise. Now this seems kind of unusual, really. It is unusual. Not just the voice of God stuff, that's unusual in and of itself, but the idea of breaking off from one's family and then setting out on your own. That just didn't happen back in this time period. Terah, by all accounts, he was a pretty wealthy guy. They'd established themselves well there in Haran. He had accumulated a lot of flocks, a lot of herds, servants to take care of them, and while they were there. And it looked like Haran was a pretty good place to live. I mean, it was profitable for them for sure, and safe. And so to get this word from God, a God that Terah and the rest of the family didn't know, didn't worship, so it's a strange God to them. But to get this word from God and to strike out into the unknown, that's a pretty bold thing to do. Now, the story in Genesis, it doesn't let us into what's going on in Abraham's mind, what he's thinking at this time. A little more of that later on in in this story. But at this point, it's real simple. It's obedience. That's it. Verse 4 of that 12th chapter of Genesis, it says this. So Abram went. They're still calling him Abram yet. God hadn't changed his name to Abraham. But Abram went as the Lord told him. That's it. That's all you get from the story. And he goes. He goes. He heads off into this land that God has been promising him, and he travels around in it. He moves from one place to the other. He goes down to Egypt. There's a famine in the land, and he has to escape that, and he kind of gets into some trouble down in Egypt, if you want to read the story with the Pharaoh there. And he comes back, and he chases down these warlords who kidnap his nephew Lot, and he beats them, and he gets his wife's servant pregnant. And you've read probably this story. Would have been a little bit different back in the day, a little more culturally acceptable, but still a lot of problems result, so maybe not that different. Anyway, this is just a long account, chapter after chapter, of Abraham trying to be faithful to what God calls him to, trying to move in this way that God wants him to. It's an account of Abraham going. Gets into some difficulties and some trials, but by and large, he's doing what God has called him to do. He's believing in God's promises. And it all started out with that one simple verse, verse 4 of chapter 12. So Abraham went as the Lord told him to do. From today until Advent on our calendar, we're going to be looking at some of the virtues of the Christian life. Given the state of our world and how dysfunctional a lot of it seems to be right now, I thought that we would all benefit from focusing on something a little more positive. And what could be more positive than a virtuous life? When we were examining Paul's letter to the Colossians a while back, we came across this list of virtues in the text and characteristics that Paul wanted the Colossians to take on. He wanted to put them on, he said, in place of these vices, the bad things that Paul wanted them to take off and put to death. And as I mentioned then, the list that Paul gives the Colossian church, it's not a comprehensive list, not every virtue that you could imagine. And preparing for this, I came across some virtue lists that were like 40 virtues long. I don't have that much time. That's a lot of virtues. And they're probably splitting hairs on some of them. But at any rate, there's a lot of potential virtues that we could look at, and I'm not going to pretend that the list that I put together was comprehensive either. It's not every one that we could think about. And I don't want you to think that some of the virtues are more significant than others. I only have a certain number of Sundays between now and Christmas, so that's what we're limited by. And I think these are good ones, though. I think these are good ones. And when you think about these virtue lists, the one that comes to mind probably for most of us is the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians. Love, joy, peace, and so forth. They're all in here. That's all going to be part of this. A few extra ones that we put in there. And I want you to know, too, that I put them in random order. So there's not a priority. I don't want you to read that into it. It's just these are the virtues, and we're going to be moving through them. Today's faithfulness. Paul says love is the greatest of these. That comes at the end of September. But they're all in there that we're looking at, and they're kind of random. I just want you to kind of know where we're headed. So today we're starting with faithfulness. And as we mentioned, the writers of the Bible, they keep going back to this character of Abraham whenever they're thinking about faithfulness. He's constantly held up as the epitome of faithfulness. And Abraham, he displays this, the essence, the heart of what faithfulness is. God speaks to Abraham. God offers these promises to Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation. It uses beautiful language, as numerous as the stars in the sky. But Abraham doesn't know how or when or where all of this is going to come about. He's got a general, vague idea, but he doesn't really know the specifics. But Abraham still goes. Abraham goes. When God tells him to go, he went. And Abraham goes through an incredible amount of life waiting for God to make good on this promise. In fact, Abraham, as both the author to Hebrews and Paul says, was as good as dead. That's the language that they use before the fulfillment of this promise comes about. But through all of that, Abraham is still faithful. Now, faith is absolutely an essential part of our Christian life. It's so significant that in many ways we kind of mix up this idea with our understanding of religious identity. We call it our faith. We have a faith. When we talk about our religion, that's the word that we use. We, as Christians, are part of what we call the Christian faith. Others might be of the faith that's called Buddhism. Others might be of a faith that's called Judaism. It's kind of the label that we use to describe our religious practice. Now, this makes a lot of sense because religious practice is, in a lot of ways, based on faith. Belief, what we believe. The term faith and belief, they kind of bleed into each other a little bit. They're somewhat interchangeable. What you believe, that's what you have faith in. That makes sense. I have faith that this roof will be held up by these walls and these rafters. I have faith in that. I believe that to be the case. Now, a religion is a system of beliefs, things that we have faith in, a body of things that we hold to be true and trustworthy. But as you can see, there's a difference between the concept of religion and something that one simply believes. Like I said, I have faith that the roof is going to be held up by the structure of this building, but that is not a religion. Well, it might be a weird religion, but in this case, I'm not talking about religion in that way. So I want us to set aside this idea that faith is one's religion. Okay, that's a label that we use, but just set that aside. And I want us to look at the idea of faith itself. What does that word mean? Well, there's some connection between faith and belief. In what way does faith go beyond belief? For a lot of Christians, our idea of faith is shaped by that passage that Dave read earlier from Hebrews chapter 11. We sort of consider that the Christian definition of faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. It's the conviction, confidence of things not seen. Now, here we have this idea of belief. Things that we don't know, but we have assurance of them in our hearts. But it's different than the belief that I have that the roof isn't going to collapse on us. Faith has an element of belief without what we would consider evidence. Now, it's where we get this idea of blind faith. Have you heard the label blind faith? Oh, they just got blind faith. Well, faith that we may identify that as faith that doesn't have a reasonable or rational warrant, explanation. It seems like that's what Abraham had, is some kind of that sort of faith. He apparently believed God was going to do what God promised to do, even though he was good as dead. At least that's how we like to think of it. Now, this sort of idea of blind faith, it's a sticking point for a lot of folks that are more of a scientific mind or a rational mindset. They don't get it because they put such a premium on evidence and proof. Or maybe if you're from Missouri, the show me state. You want to have some kind of proof, right? That these things are true. And having a blind faith seems silly to them. They don't get it, even immature. But I'd argue that the faith that the author of Hebrews is talking about here is not a blind faith. Not in the way that we would think about it if we think about blind faith meaning absolutely nothing to back it up. I think that faith is always going to have some reason behind it. There's some warrant to it, some reason that you have this belief. Even if it's just a feeling, even if it's just a sense that you have of the trustworthiness of the thing that you have faith in, even if it's just a hope, we've always got a place to start. We've always got a place to start. Just because we can't see it or touch it, it doesn't mean that we don't somehow sense it. We've got a conviction. We start from that place. In essence, this is what I'm getting at. Faith fills in the space, however large or small that space might be, between what we know to be true and what we hope to be true. Faith fills in that space. And because so much of religious practice lives in that space, between what we know to be true and what we hope, it's no wonder that we start to call our religion our faith. Now, in the Christian faith, the word faith, it's always there. It's always present. I'm going to take you back a little bit in church history to the Reformation. In the Reformed tradition, that broad stream of Christian theology and thought that came out of the Reformation, they talk about this thing called the five solae. Is that something you maybe have heard before? The five solae, the solae, or the singular sola, means solely, basically, or holy, or this alone is what the word means. And one of the five solae is sola fide. That means faith alone, by faith alone. And what that means is this, that we are who we are as believers, righteous, justified, able to stand before God, not because of what we've done, our work, or because of any merit that might possibly have accumulated to our credit because of our good deeds. We don't stand before God because of that, but only through faith, sola fide. Now, Paul in Romans 3:28 says this explicitly. He puts this idea forward where he says, "For we hold that a person is justified by faith, apart from works prescribed by the law." Faith does, as we mentioned, have a connection to this idea of belief. We have faith in something. We believe something or someone. And when we say that, it means that we believe in them, when we have faith in them. We hold them to be trustworthy. I have faith in the structure of this building, so to speak. We think that that person that we have faith in is telling the truth, that they're presenting something to us that is true. And for some, Christianity, or really any religion, if you will, gets reduced to that idea of simply holding a principle to be true. I believe that thing. That's it. That's as far as it goes. We believe it. We have faith in it, and it's the beginning and the end of it. But we need to be careful. We need to be careful. As often is the case, something gets lost in translation. So we're going to move from church history to a little bit of New Testament Greek. New Testament Greek, the writers that wrote the New Testament, they all wrote in Greek. And the Greek word that gets translated as faith. Now, pay attention, keep with me on this. The Greek word that we translate as faith in English, it's more complex than just that. The Greek word is pistis. Not going to be tested on this, but just follow with me. Pistis, and depending on where you put that word in the sentence, where it is in its context, it gets translated in English as both faith and faith, meaning believing in something, believing in someone. And it also gets translated as faithfulness. Same Greek word, two different English words. Faithfulness, acting in a manner that is consistent with one's belief. Now currently, if you want to get into this kind of stuff, there's a lot of discussion going on among people who study Paul's letters, and they're asking this question. You take a passage like Romans 3:22. And in Romans 3:22, it says, "The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ." Now, the original Greek in that, the phrase is pistis Iesus. Okay, pistis Iesus. And that's been expressed in most English translations as faith in Jesus. Now, hang with me here. It may be more accurate, the translation might be more accurate if we translated it the other way and it said, the faithfulness of Jesus, instead of faith in Jesus. It's the same two words. Pistis Iesus. Now think about that. There's a lot of implications about how you translate that word. Whether you go for faith in, belief in Jesus versus the faithfulness of Jesus. One leads you towards this idea of belief in Jesus. Another leads you towards this idea of the faithful behavior of Jesus, making salvation possible. You see the distinction there? Now, my sense of it is that Paul was fully aware of this dual meaning to the word pistis. And when he uses that word, pistis Iesus, he had both our belief in Jesus and the faithfulness of Jesus in mind when he used that phrase. The point is this, it's not an either one or the other, it's a both this one and that one. Because Jesus was faithful, because Jesus did what God the Father called him to do, that makes our salvation possible. So obviously the faithfulness of Jesus is true, but we got to believe in it. So we also need to have faith in Jesus. Regardless, the reality is that when a New Testament author, any of them, uses that word, pistis, they're always talking about both of these concepts, both faith as a belief and faithfulness, following up on that belief. In some contexts, the meaning shifts towards that idea of belief. In others, it shifts towards obedience. But in all, faith and faithfulness are linked together. So when we think about this example of Abraham, we start to see this richer idea of faith and faithfulness coming into view. Abraham was faithful because he had faith. He believed what God had told him. And because he believed what God had told him, he did what God called him to do. Because he had faith, he was faithful. He trusted God. His conviction was that what God had promised him was going to come to pass. And because God is faithful, that song that we sang, "Great is thy faithfulness," couldn't be more true. Because God is faithful, it is God's faithfulness that is at the root of Abraham's faith, which leads to Abraham's faithfulness. This is in verse 8 of that 11th chapter of Hebrews. There the writer says, "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he set out, not knowing where he was going." How many of us do that? God says, "I want you to do this." "Where are we going, God?" "Where are we going, God?" "I'm not going to go until I know where we're going." That's not faithfulness. By faith, he stayed for a time in the land that he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has its foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, he received power of procreation, even though he was too old. And Sarah herself was barren, because he considered him faithful who had promised, because he considered God faithful. Therefore, from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born, as many as the stars in heaven. Abraham's belief, his faith, led him to do all the things that he did. His faithfulness, and in no insignificant way, his belief itself is a sign of his faithfulness. Which brings us to this 10th chapter. We were in the 11th, now we're backing up to the 10th. But this is where our text is today. Therefore, the author says there, because of what Jesus has done, because of the faithfulness of Jesus, pistis Jesus, the way that Jesus has made it possible for us to enter this sanctuary with confidence, to be able to stand before God righteous, holy, clean. Because of what Jesus has done, then we can be faithful. We can hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. We can encourage each other, spurring each other on. Provoking is the word. That's great. How many of you provoke people to good? Most of the time we provoke people to not so good. Provoking each other on to love and good deeds. That's very active language, isn't it? It's not passive. It's not like it's just all going on in your head. There's something happening with your hands and your feet here. This is doing language. This is not faith in that overly simplistic sort of believing something is true. This is faith that moves. This is faith that acts. This is faith that does. This is faith that when God says go, we go. It's where the Greek word pistis moves from belief to obedience, from faith to faithfulness. Because of the faithfulness of Jesus, we are called to be faithful. And because we believe Jesus, because Jesus is trustworthy, because we have faith in Jesus, then faithfulness from us is the only logical next step. The Reformers, these folks out of that Protestant Reformation all the way back in the day, they had a trouble with the letter of James. They struggled a little bit with this letter because they were so conscious of the necessity of faith, belief, how it is through faith alone that we are saved, that sola fide. They struggled with the idea that faith also includes this idea of faithfulness, of obedience, of following through on what God calls us to do. Now, they feared this supposed works righteousness that implied that somehow we could earn our salvation. And yeah, they were right to resist that. But the Reformers, to an extent, they took faith and they interpreted it one-dimensionally, as if it only meant one thing, just simply belief. Believe, and that's enough. And James clearly understood this connection between faith and faithfulness. It was only one word for him. In James 2, he says, "What good is it, brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can that faith save you?" He goes on a little bit later in the same chapter, "But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith." What I think James is talking about here is faithfulness. Faithfulness. I think that he's saying that if your faith is just limited to this idea of believing something, then it's really no different than the faith of the demons. Demons believe and shudder. That ain't enough. But if your faith in God leads you to faithfulness, then you really have connected the idea of belief and behavior. Faithfulness is an outworking of our convictions, an outworking of our beliefs, a manifestation of the state of our hearts. What we believe in our hearts, in our minds, what we profess with our mouths will show up in what we do. And that is faithfulness. Faith leads to faithfulness, and faithfulness is a sign of faith. When James talks about works, he's simply saying that if you really believe in God, if you really, truly trust God, in that religious faith sort of way, then you will do what God calls you to do. You will be faithful. When God says, go, you'll go. Faithfulness. For the Christian, it's a conscious decision to act on the trust that we have in God. Do you trust God? Is God faithful? Did you believe that song that we sang earlier? Great is thy faithfulness. Do you believe that? Is God worthy of our trust? Has God promised things that have not come about? Has God lied to you? If we can act on that belief, that trust that we have in God, because I pray that we do trust God. I pray that we do believe God. I pray that these promises mean something to us. If we can act on that belief, though, see, faithfulness is a lot simpler. It's not complicated. It's not like we have to sort through all the Greek words and all the doctrinal positions and all the theology from 500 years ago. We don't have to worry about that. Okay? We don't have to memorize a bunch of rules and laws and things. We don't have to be on the right side of any position that comes along. Faithfulness is simple. Did God tell you to do it? Then do it. If you believe God, if you trust God, and God says to do it, do it. That's faithfulness. Faithfulness is simple obedience to God's calling. Like Abraham, when God says go, we go. And because God is faithful, then we can have faith in God, and then we can be faithful. Let's pray. Lord God, you are worthy of our trust. There is not a single thing that you have promised that has not or will not come to pass. You are completely trustworthy. You do not lie. You do not deceive. You love us too much for that. You are worth believing in. You are worth us having faith in you. And Lord, our faith is weak and shoddy at times. It comes with too many conditions. We want too many proofs. But Lord, we know that you are faithful, that you continue to be with us, that your presence guides us and lifts us up and gives us strength every moment of our days. It all comes as a gift. And so in your faithfulness, you have made it possible for us to believe you. You've made a way for us to be in your presence through the blood of Jesus. And we are yours when we believe. But Lord, we know that that belief must go further. Our faith needs to move into faithfulness. And we will do what you call us to do and go when you call us to go. And so, Lord, we ask for your strength, your courage, the stamina that we need to keep running this race. Help us to be faithful, Lord, in little things and in big things, in all things. Pray in the name of the one who is faithful, Jesus Christ. Amen.
To 323, sing the first verse, Standing on the Promises.
Bow with me once again. Lord, we ask your blessing on these, your people. You have called them, you've gathered them in, and now you send them into the world. We pray that you would give them the courage that they need, the strength that they need to be faithful in this turbulent world that we live in. Help them to be a beacon for you. And bring us together again so that we may praise and worship you. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen. You may go in peace.